Warning, the following program contains strong Zoro fanboying. Viewer discretion is advised.
It starts as most things do in shonen, with an epic battle. On July 27th, 1998, 22 years ago, Shonen Jump magazine published the 50th chapter of a fresh story about a young man dreaming of becoming Pirate King. And it was on this hot summer day that everything changed for the 23-year-old upcoming mangaka Eiichiro Oda and his ambitious story of One Piece. Because this 50th chapter not only marked the beginning of one of the most memorable fights in the series, but it also set the tone for what kind of story this was going to be. I'm of course talking about the battle between Roronoa Zoro and Dracula Mihawk at the Baratie. Now, I think it's time to finally come clean about something that I've been asked about more times than I can count. Ohara, what is your favorite character? And for the longest time, I didn't want to reveal this because I've actually no idea why. But I swear I had a good reason for this, I think. Well, anyway, let's get this out of the way. Here are my top 5. Number 5, the Blind Swordsman, Fujitora. Number 4, the Laughing Skeleton, Brook. Number 3, the Rubber Boy, Luffy. Number 2, the next Straw Hat, Yamato. I bet that choice would never come back to haunt me, would it? And the undisputed number 1, my favorite character in all of One Piece that no one would have ever guessed is... the legendary swordsman, Zoro. No, not that one. Thank you. The secret has finally been lifted, and yes, I actually like the same character most of you guys like as well. I know you probably expected me to say something like, I like Otohime because the way her character is designed by Oda, but fuck that. Though Otohime is actually a pretty well-written character, especially when you consider how she... Anyway, the reason why I always liked Zoro the most is of course because he's by far the coolest and most badass character in One Piece. And this is where we have to get a tad more serious again, because what exactly does it mean for a character to be cool? Is Zoro my favorite character because he can fight well? Well, no, that goes for countless characters in the story. So there must be something more to it. And this brings me back to this moment right here at the Baratie, where Zoro faces off Mihawk and declares his loyalty to Luffy. While admittedly there will be quite a bunch of iconic Zoro moments that we'll be discussing in the Iconic Series Analysis series, trademark, it is this scene right here that made me fall in love with Zoro's character and that has made me cheer for him ever since. And so today I want to break down with you what makes the fight between him and Mihawk, I said Mihawk, so special, and how it was a turning point guaranteeing the story's lasting success. So as you know, as a loyal viewer of the series, we'll start with a quick recap of the scene before diving deeper into the analysis part of this video. If you want to skip this part, like Kaido skips his lag day, then you can go to the timecode up here, and if you want to follow along, we'll be discussing chapters 49 to 52 of the manga, episode 24 of the anime, or you can also watch the updated version of the scene in the episode of the Mary. Whee! The scene takes place after Sanji saving Gin, no, you don't know that yet, and after Don Krieg and his decimated crew have made their way back from the Grand Line. Thanks to Zeph and his cooks, the starved crew starts to recover and are rejoicing at being saved and having survived the horrors of the Grand Line, somehow making it back into the East Blue alive. Amidst their joy, however, Krieg tells them that they will actually return to the Grand Line, and upon seeing the understandable lack of motivation of his crew to return to the place they were almost killed at, he shoots one of his men who dares criticizing his decision. He then declares that he will be taking the Baratie ship as well, since the cooks there are easy to defeat, despite the fact that they had saved his life. When his men start attacking the floating restaurant, however, the heavily damaged gigantic ship they arrived on is suddenly cut in half. Amidst the confusion that ensues, Nami steals the Mary to travel home, And while Zoro thinks that it's not really worth pursuing her, both Luffy and Usopp disagree, Usopp wanting the Mary back, and Luffy insisting on making Nami their navigator. Zoro agrees, despite being a bit annoyed by Luffy's attitude here. However, when he and Usopp prepare to set sail, Mihawk arrives at the scene. Zoro is in absolute disbelief that the man he was looking for has now actually arrived right before his eyes. As it turns out, it was Mihawk who had attacked Krieg's fleet and had chased after them simply to kill some time. Upon hearing this, one of the Krieg pirates attempts to shoot him, but Mihawk easily deflects the bullet with his mighty black sword Yoru. And while some of the pirates seem to think that they simply missed, Zoro immediately understands what has happened here, and he addresses Mihawk, "Thank you," and he addresses Mihawk directly. He tells him about his goal to take his place as the strongest swordsman in the world and challenges him to a duel, seeing the chance to fulfill his dream right here, right now. Mihawk, however, doesn't seem to be particularly impressed by this. He gets slowly off his ship, approaches Zoro, and calls him a weakling, telling him that if he truly were a great swordsman, the difference in their powers would be obvious to him without the need to cross blades. Zoro, however, insists, and Mihawk humiliates him even more by picking a small pocket knife as his weapon of choice, stating that it would be inappropriate to use his big sword to hunt a mere rabbit, also referencing the East Blue as the weakest of the four seas, not capable of producing any notable fighters. He then uses the small knife to stop Zoro's fierce attacks, who in disbelief about this striking difference in power, first thinks of his promise to Kuina, and then Luffy, and redoubles his efforts. Mihawk, realizing his mental anguish, asks him what is burdening him, and finally stabs him right in the chest. While everyone is visibly shocked at the devastating blow, the biggest surprise comes from Mihawk, as Zoro simply stands there with the knife in his chest, not making any attempt to withdraw. In this moment, Mihawk's annoyed impression changes for the first time, and you can see his respect for Zoro grow. Only now, he actually asks Zoro to state his name, promising to remember it, and as a gesture of respect to a fellow swordsman, he tells Zoro that he will fight him with the world's strongest blade. In this last standoff, Zoro unleashes his ultimate attack on Mihawk. But it's not enough. He sheds the Wado Ichimonji, no, I said Wado Ichimonji, and he turns around towards Mihawk, presenting him his open chest, prepared to receive his death blow. Mihawk is visibly pleased with Zoro's brave gesture, and slashes his chest open, noting that Zoro shouldn't rush his own death. After seeing his first mate apparently killed in front of his eyes, Luffy charges against Mihawk full of rage, while Johnny and Yosaku dive into the sea to save Zoro. Instead of fighting Luffy, however, Mihawk tells him that Zoro isn't dead and properly introduces himself for the very first time, urging Zoro to become stronger and face him once again. He then asks Luffy for his goal, and once Luffy answers, Kaizoku! Mihawk acknowledges that this will be an even more difficult task than surpassing him. In that moment, Zoro regains consciousness. Coughing up blood, he lifts his blade into the air and makes an oath to Luffy. Now, looking more than pleased, Mihawk turns around to leave without paying any more attention to the Don Krieg pirates who he was looking for in the first place. He tells Luffy that him and Zoro make a great team, and that he wishes to meet them again in the future. Honestly, no matter how often I watch or read this scene here, it always gives me shivers. I think it just has this sense of tingling atmosphere that I love so much in great stories. Now, while the last scene surrounding Blackbeard's speech on Jaya was made so special mostly by the incredible amount of symbolism it carried, one might think that this moment here is made amazing mostly by the fighting choreography between Zoro and Mihawk. Thank you. But what I really think this scene here excels at is something that I think is quite often overlooked in One Piece: dialogue. The conversations and dialogue in the scene are fantastic and do a wonderful job of enhancing the other artistic elements in this moment. And so I really want to talk about this in a second. First though, actually, let's start with symbolism once again, since there is a lot of interesting stuff packed in here that I think will give us a good grasp of what's going on. Let's start with something I noticed for the first time here when rereading the scene for this video. Both Zoro and Mihawk have the theme of religion incorporated into their characters. For Zoro, this clearly is Buddhism, as we can see with his technique Sansen Sekai 3000 Worlds for the very first time in this scene here. It's a pattern that follows Zoro throughout the series, something that my friend Joyboy covers in this video here, that will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check that out. Also, JB, if you're watching this, thanks so much for putting up with my wacky ideas, buddy. I rewatched the intro to this video way more than I probably should have. Now, next to Zoro's connections to Buddhism, Mihawk's character also is surrounded by a number of religious symbols. However, in his case, it is Christianity, not Buddhism, that is referenced. In fact, Mihawk's entire design strongly resembles that of the stereotypical Spanish Inquisitor, or at least a very religious Spanish swordsman. His hat and the golden cross on his chest that contains the small pocket knife he stabbed Zoro with, as well as his facial hair, make this connection quite obvious. Further, Mihawk's ship is literally a giant coffin with a large cross for a mast that also resembles the hilt of his sword Yoru. So in essence, we have two swordsmen representing two religions in this scene. And you could of course spin this even further and say that Shanks is also a swordsman who represents another religion with Nordic mythology. But I think we're kind of losing track of things here a little bit, so let's get back to topic. Next to the religious aspect, I think Mihawk's swords also have another symbolic meaning here: respect. Mihawk uses his pocket knife, the smallest weapon he carries, to face Zoro at first, showing just how little he thinks of him and how unworthy he is of facing the strongest swordsman in the world. Mihawk is a quite proud character after all. However, once Zoro proves his determination and honor to him, Mihawk switches from his smallest weapon to Yoru, the mightiest blade in the world, symbolizing that Zoro has now gained Mihawk's full respect as a swordsman and is worthy of facing the blade of the strongest swordsman as well. And speaking of swordsmen, of course there's also a lot of symbolism regarding the Bushido, the path of the warrior, that both Mihawk and Zoro follow, and we'll get into this a bit more when looking at the dialogue, but Zoro not stepping back after getting stabbed, offering his chest and displaying honor, respect and loyalty show that Zoro and Mihawk are in fact following the same path, and that Mihawk can respect and accept Zoro as a fellow swordsmaster. And I feel that Oda goes even further than that, because this scene here is the basis for the entire growth Zoro has as a fighter over the course of the story, by offering multiple parallels to Mihawk here. For instance, Mihawk uses a tiny blade here to fight against someone he sees unworthy. Zoro uses the small seppuku blade to cut down the unworthy samurai in the flower capital in Wano. Mihawk cuts up Don Krieg's ship at the Baratie, and Zoro cuts up a ship when returning after the time skip. Mihawk also calls Zoro a frog in a well here, basically implying that he's ignorant of the world at large, and Zoro does the very same thing to one of the fishmen on Fishman Island. And all of this has of course happened after Mihawk became Zoro's mentor and taught him for 2 years. These references to the scene here at the Baratie symbolize just how much Zoro has grown and how much closer he's now to Mihawk. Meanwhile, I feel like the entire religious aspect between them might finally make the difference in Zoro surpassing his mentor. In the end, this scene here tells us that will is even more important than power, as Mihawk expects Zoro to surpass him due to his burning will. But Luffy also carries the symbol here, as his battle with Don Krieg is also a clear sign that a strong will is way more important than physical power. And Luffy and Zoro actually share something else in this scene. They show us what true leadership and loyalty should look like. Luffy and Zoro have the exact opposite dynamic from Don Krieg and his men. The way Luffy treats Zoro and vice versa is built on trusting each other and believing in each other's dreams, all things that distinguish the Straw Hats from most other pirates throughout the story. And you can even include Nami and Sanji into this. Nami steals the Mary to look after her home village, however deeply regretting having to leave Luffy behind and betraying him. Meanwhile, Sanji, who was opposed to joining the crew, is finally convinced to follow Luffy as his captain by his and Zoro's actions here. This starts with Zoro's incredible fight against Mihawk and ends with Luffy's victory over Don Krieg. And finally, I think that the entire sequence here serves as a symbol for what is about to come in the story. The goal that the Straw Hats are heading towards, the Grand Line. So far, we've encountered a number of villains that caused some trouble for our heroes, but never truly were threatening or pushing them to the edge. This, however, is different. The enormous ship of Don Krieg coming back from the Grand Line, where he lost an entire fleet, gives us a feeling of what lies ahead, and it clearly doesn't feel like it will be the tropical adventure we've had so far. And when Mihawk arrives at the scene and we learn that he was the one who sank almost 50 of Krieg's ships simply to kill some time, we understand that the people the Straw Hats will be facing on the Grand Line will be on a completely different level. After all, Mihawk's ship is a literal coffin, and the Grand Line is also known as the Pirates' Graveyard. Something that I think is very interesting to look at as well in the scene are the framing and composition here. As mentioned at the beginning, these chapters are from 1998 and from a time where Oda's art style was still very much in its infancy. Now that doesn't mean of course that it's bad or anything, but comparing the chapters nowadays with the early chapters of One Piece, you can definitely tell that drawing every day for over 20 years helps at least a little bit to improve. Thus, the characters back in the day still looked a bit more static and simple, and the artwork lacked some of the spatial and ambient feel that Oda manages to integrate in most of his panels today. There are three things that are quite notably great here already, however. First, Oda already displays a liking towards gigantism here. This panel of Krieg's flagship towering over the Baratie restaurant is fantastic, and gives the entire scene an otherworldly and epic feel, something very fitting for foreshadowing the Grand Line and how it will overshadow the East Blue. Secondly, the artwork here already has quite decent framing and composition. The way the ship is later cut in two with the Baratie as a reference point for its size, and the way that the ship's figurehead seems to be in pain here are wonderful details in this shot. And thirdly, while I never shy away from mentioning that there are other mangaka out there that outperform Oda in terms of battle art and the overall battle system, Oda has a unique sense for creating drama and conveying feelings through body language and dialogue in his scenes. They almost feel like conversations in themselves. Thus, moments like Mihawk stopping Zoro's 3 blades with his pocket knife, the powerful moment before he stabs Zoro, or Mihawk actually cutting Zoro down, all have great composition, and the line of events is portrayed in a way that builds emotion and stakes very fast for the audience. Also, I feel like the updated version of the anime does a particularly great job here, updating Oda's work and giving it a more modern and dynamic feel. Okay, but now let's finally look at the dialogue in the scene, which I think brings all of these other elements together and truly makes the scene unique and iconic. Before we can get into the fantastic conversation between Zoro, Mihawk, and Luffy, I quickly want to direct your attention to this panel here, however, when Nami tells Johnny and Yosaku that she and the Straw Hats will meet again if they're truly linked by fate. I think this is a very powerful line by Nami here in a number of ways. Because, as we know, Luffy and co end up meeting her again in the end, alright, but they don't just randomly encounter her because of chance or fate, but because of Luffy's will to make her part of the crew and save her from her misery that we can see when Nami wishes to be free, with tears streaming down her face after leaving. So it's really not about the Straw Hats being pushed forward by fate, as many people seem to believe, as was for instance the case with Naruto or Ichigo in the end, but I rather think it is Oda's way of saying very early on in the story that Luffy doesn't care about destiny and fate, but that his own strong will allows him to forge his own path ahead and overcome fate. That's why I found it so important to include this part into my analysis as well, and I think it also nicely translates into the dialogue between Mihawk and Zoro. Because Mihawk acknowledges Zoro for his will and determination to surpass him, and not because he was always destined to become the strongest. When Zoro refuses to step back after Mihawk nearly pierces his heart, he tells Mihawk that if he stepped back right now, he would lose his dream and honor as a swordsman and would rather die. Zoro proves his strong will here to achieve his dream, and it is this will that changes Mihawk's perception of him. As he says here, your strength is not often seen in this world. Clearly, it's not Zoro's physical strength. So for the very first time in this moment, I think Oda presents will, or more specifically strength of will, as the most important quality for his characters. That counts way more than raw physical ability, and even more than faith. And ultimately, with the introduction of Haki, it becomes clear that willpower literally surpasses both of these things. You can use your willpower to drastically increase your fighting power, and you can even use it to glimpse ahead into the future and change your own fate. I'm honestly not sure if Oda already had the concept of Haki planned out at this early point in the story, and if I had to bet, I would probably say no. But it is painfully obvious that will was gonna be the essential driving force in the story right from the start. Similarly, Mihawk also recognizes Luffy's will to strive to become Pirate King without a hint of the mocking he had for Zoro at the start. Of course, Zoro's fight played an important part here, but I think that Luffy, being a Conqueror Haki user, probably already radiated a strong sense of will. And it is probably also at this moment here that Mihawk remembers the story that Shanks told him of how he lost his arm, seeing Luffy's powers and the Straw Hats. I think we can even see this moment of recognition in this panel here, where Luffy first stretches his arm. But I think the dialogue does even more here though, as especially in the Japanese, but also in the English version, the words that Mihawk uses to address Zoro more and more reflect his change in attitude and his rising level of respect for him. His speech pattern switches from this to this. Here, Mihawk addresses Zoro by his first name and challenges him to surpass him. I think to some degree, this is due to Mihawk yearning for a true challenge after losing Shanks. But I also believe that as a master swordsman and sharing Zoro's values and beliefs, he has chosen Zoro as worthy to follow in his footsteps and keep these values alive and defend their craft against non-believers, if you want to bring it back to the religious theme. And so I believe it makes for an even starker contrast when Mihawk is finally approached by Don Krieg again, as his face completely reverts from an excited glow to disgust and annoyance, and he slashes the ship once more before disappearing. Because I feel with this, he contrasts the difference between Luffy and Krieg before their battle even begins. Now, last but not least, I of course want to address Zoro's speech to Luffy, which is the second of my favorite Zoro moments in the scene. After Luffy has displayed true care and fear for his first mate's life, even shedding a rare tear, Zoro now publicly acknowledges and honors Luffy for the very first time in the story. Zoro clearly has realized Luffy's true love and respect for him, as he apologizes for worrying his captain. He declares that he will never lose again, and that he will stand by the next Pirate King, making clear that he fully believes in Luffy and his dreams, just as Luffy believes in him. As far as I can remember, it's the only time we ever see Zoro cry in the story outside of Kuina's death. And it makes the scene just the more impactful for seeing the otherwise stoic and composed samurai this emotional and vulnerable. I think it's really what makes this scene even better when you come back to it later. And so, in just about 3 chapters, Zoro has established himself as the most honorable, loyal, and determined person that Luffy could have ever wished for as his right-hand man, and the reasons why I love his character so much. This scene serves as a basis for so many other wonderful Zoro moments in the story, and it's an important element for making him a deeper and more complex character, and thus distinguishes him from most other strong characters. It's a moment that is incredibly important for his and Luffy's development, and their fights are ultimately the reason why Sanji decides to join them and follow his own dream as well.
Sanji?
Another moment with Zoro I really liked in the scene is when Nami is leaving. Zoro thinks it's a bad idea following her and getting in trouble for it, but he follows his captain anyway. This is wonderfully referenced during the Whole Cake Island arc, where he also is skeptical about following Sanji, but ends up respecting Luffy's decision anyway. As a result, when the Straw Hats chase after Nami towards Arlong Park, we get another one of my favorite moments in the story. Luffy saving Nami and giving her his hat. And so we'll be looking at that in the next video. So stay tuned for that, and don't forget to leave me your feedback and ideas for the next videos in the series. Thanks guys, peace.